Thought to have been built sometime between 800 and 1100 AD, around 2,000 Erdstall tunnels can be found across Central Europe, particularly in Bavaria, where there are over 700. With only one way in and one way out, some of these claustrophobic tunnels have crawl spaces that are just over 1 foot wide. Could they be graves for the souls of the dead, or have some other religious purpose? Maybe they are hideaways from raiding parties or pillaging soldiers, or as some have suggested, the relics of aliens who left hundreds of years ago. Let's join the archaeologists who are examining the Erdstall tunnels to try and determine their real purpose. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Did you know that there's a tunnel under Europe? The word Erdstall means earth stable, but the word stable used to have a more general meaning in the sense of place or location. Earth stables are mysterious underground places, corridors and chambers not made by any natural means like ordinary caves, but rather dug out of the ground and even chiseled out of the rock by humans. There are thousands of these complexes all across Europe. Some are multi-leveled and connected by what the Germans call schlupfs or slip-outs, tight crawl spaces hardly wide enough for a single person. Getting from one level to another is not for the faint-hearted, however. Anyone brave enough to go exploring in these tunnels has to squeeze through an opening just over 1 foot wide. The tunnels generally have one entrance and exit point, meaning that there was hardly any airflow through the systems. They were usually hidden away somewhere in old settlements, sometimes in forest areas. In most cases, the tunnels are entered through a horizontal shaft or one that has a slight slope down. However, some are vertical shafts with a diameter of between 40 and 80 centimeters, which is just 16 to 32 inches. It seems as though the tunnels were well planned out and constructed by professional miners, as it's clear that the work was carried out purposefully by experienced people. They must have been kneeling to dig the tunnels using wedge-shaped tools and then chiseled out a little niche every few meters to place their oil lamp. They dug out the longer passages in a winding form to reduce the weight and pressure of the surrounding earth. No supports were ever used. Archaeologists have experimented with medieval tools and found that it would take 3 to 5 people several months to complete an average-sized complex. Deeper underground. In 2011, a dairy farmer named Beat Grethane was walking barefoot across the lush pastures of the Dobelberg Mountain in Bavaria, the beautiful snow-capped peaks of the Alps visible in the distance. Suddenly, one of her grazing cows fell through the earth. A cavity had opened up beneath the unfortunate cow. The following day, Beat's husband Rudy went out to examine the crater. He stuck his head inside and craned his neck to peer into the empty darkness. As he climbed in to investigate, he wondered if there may be some sort of treasure buried down there in the narrow, damp tunnel. As he walked diagonally down into the earth, Rudy realized that he could no longer hear the world outside, and it was becoming more and more difficult to breathe in the stagnant and oppressive air. He quickly ended his short adventure. The Gretanes from the town of Glonn near Munich had found themselves the owners of a maze of Erdstall tunnels beneath their property, measuring at least 25 meters or 82 feet long. Local talk soon turned to it being the dwelling of friendly goblins. At the end of June, geologists arrived on the property determined to solve the mystery. 3 members of the Working Group for Erdstall Research pulled the heavy concrete cover away from the tunnel entrance, and they disappeared into the dark passage. Dieter Alborn, the leader of the inquiry, started to crawl through a passageway that only measured about 70 centimeters or 2 foot 3 inches wide. Andreas Mittermüller, his colleague, had to return to the surface because the lack of oxygen was making him feel ill. Alborn continued and came across a piece of decayed wood. He clutched it like it was a precious jewel, hoping that it could give a clue to the age of the cave. A piece of charcoal was discovered at some passages in the Bavarian village of Hockermühl. It was dated to the period between 950 and 1050 AD. Tunnels everywhere. Erdstalls have been found in a range of different areas, beneath farmhouses, near churches and cemeteries, or in the middle of a forest. Some have been found beneath city areas and markets like those in the Bavarian town of Oberwiechtag and the Czech city of Brno. After being abandoned in the 14th and 15th centuries, they were converted into cellars by expanding the passages and creating storage areas. It's hard to imagine that they were used for this purpose originally though, as they are just so narrow and many of them fill up with water in the winter. Probably not the best place to be keeping any foodstuffs or livestock animals either. It is only in recent years that the caves have been explored by professional archaeologists. Lambert Kahner, a Benedictine priest from Gottwig Abbey in Austria, explored the passages in the 19th century and wrote his book Artificial Caves from Old Times in 1903. He recorded how he crawled through 400 vaults with the use of only candlelight, describing the tunnels as, quote, "strange winding passages where one can often only force oneself like a worm." An underground superhighway? So, how old are the tunnels? Pollen analysis has indicated that they date back to sometime between the 10th and 13th centuries. Some believe that the tunnels were built in the migration period, a time in European history during the 4th and 6th centuries of migration, invasion, and settlement, when whole tribes uprooted themselves, leaving their homes and abandoning the cemeteries of their ancestors. Some think it is possible that the tunnels and vaults were created then so that the dead could be honoured. Others believe that the tunnels were used as prisons to house criminals or even dungeons for the disabled. Another idea for their usage sees them as places of healing where the sick could get better in isolation without infecting the rest of the population. A sandstone relief has been found at Erdstall in the Bavarian village of Bosenreutten near the town of Lindau on Lake Constance. It depicts a goblin with a tail attached to its behind. This has led to speculation about the tunnels having some sort of supernatural use to confine demons, the undead, or evil dwarves. According to some legends, supernatural creatures such as gnomes and elves had either built them or lived in them. In some regions, names have been given to the Erdstalls to reflect their association with local folklore, like Dwarf Hole, Goblin Hole, or even Mandrake Cave. There has been some speculation that Erdstalls were connected to castles and the tunnels were secret escape routes, as mentioned in some sagas. The problem here is that Erdstalls famously only have one way in and one way out, which would make using them as a form of escape pretty impractical. One of the more wacky claims is that the Erdstalls are part of a huge interconnected network of underground tunnels stretching from Scotland in the northwest to Turkey in the southeast, and are much older than the medieval era that has been suggested, dating back 12,000 years ago to the Stone Age. They have even been dubbed an ancient underground superhighway that lets people safely travel from one place to another, no matter what chaos might be taking place above ground. There is of course one glaring error with this theory. Whilst there are thousands of Erdstalls, they are not connected. Hide and seek. Not everyone believes in superstitious or supernatural explanations. Because many sites are connected to or lie beneath medieval settlements, the archivist Josef Weckenberger is one of the people who thinks that the tunnels were hiding places, perhaps winter quarters for the Teutonic tribes. Joseph has studied the labyrinthine Erdstall galleries firsthand for over 30 years. Whenever a new discovery is made in his native Austria, he dashes off with his compass and tape measure to document the site, and he is never afraid to get his hands dirty. According to Joseph, the tunnels were built in the medieval clearing period of the 11th century. During that time, settlers from Bavaria travelled down the River Danube to farmland in the east. The Magyar or Hungarian tribes flooded the area around 1042. Robbers caused a threat to the region by raiding villages, and Joseph believes that the farmers took anything of value and hid underground in the tunnels to get away from the vermin. They would sneak into the narrow passageways and hide together, trying to stay as quiet as possible, while the intruders rifled through their homes searching for anything worth stealing. He states that one old account, quote, tells the story of a woman who was so afraid of being discovered that she suffocated her screaming baby in an Erdstall. No way out. A circular rampart and the ruins of a drawbridge surround the fortified church of St. Jacob at Kleinsettel. The church was probably built in the 12th century and expanded in the 14th or 15th. Below the choir area there is a walk-in earth stable. The entrance is in the sanctuary under the cobblestones. It's around 62 meters long, over 200 feet, and runs directly beneath the church to reach the churchyard wall. Joseph has a special permit to enter because of the risk of collapse. The tunnel gradually becomes narrower as it goes further away from the entrance. Water drips from the ceiling, and the thought of all of the weight above, especially seeing as the church has heavy columns, can be more than a little disconcerting. Joseph admits, quote, "It's certainly uncomfortable here, but the people were desperate to stay alive." To try and prove his theory, Joseph tried a survival experiment. Along with two of his colleagues, they were locked inside an Erdstall for 48 hours. It wasn't long before the lack of oxygen sent the monitors beeping and the candles began to flicker oddly. Whenever it became difficult to breathe, the men crawled back and forth into other tunnels. Joseph said the test was a success. However, researcher Dieter Almborn argues that, quote, some galleries were used as hiding places, but only much later when they were also sometimes used as toilets and refuse pits. The Austrian spelunker, the person who explores caves and one of my favourite words, Edith Bednarik, is also against the idea that the tunnels would have been used as hiding places. She explains that an Erdstall would have been a death trap if there had been a fire, as there were no emergency exits. Edith also adds that there were hardly any larger chambers where people could have stayed, and the small tunnels were far too narrow for a pregnant woman to pass through. If the terrified villagers fled to the tunnels to be packed in like sardines, why has there been no sign of any archaeological evidence? Why did no one ever drop anything or leave behind any traces of food or torches? It is this lack of archaeological evidence and the fact that the tunnels appear to have been swept clean that have caused some people to believe that they were sacred places, perhaps where bodies could be kept. But why was the purpose of the passageways kept such a secret? It is thought that up to 90% of the catacombs are still intact and have yet to be discovered. Farmer Joseph Vasmir, who has an Erdstall on his land, says it's completely quiet inside and he loves it. Quote, and when I climb back up again, the stars seem so bright you feel that you could almost touch them. The Erdstall tunnels have been referred to as Central Europe's last great mystery. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and as always, I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, hope everyone has a fantastic week. Cheers!